Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. Hey, Thriving Farmers. So today's episode is with Jonathan Bruderlein. Now, Jonathan is a farmer, horse-powered farmer out of Canada, and recently he's also taken up farmer coaching, life coaching with farmers. And so it's a fascinating interview. The main thing, though, we talk about is his transition from horse-powered farm in Canada for a number of years. And about 3 years ago, his wife came to him and said, hey, let's take a sabbatical and take our market van and travel the U.S. and Canada and see a whole bunch of farms. So they did that for the next couple of years with their 3 to 5 year old son during that time. And now they're back in Canada, getting ready to start their farm 2.0. And so we dive into the management of organic farms. We dive into what he learned on his trip. We talk about a little bit of life coaching and how that interacts with farmers, and some of the common struggles that farmers face when you don't look at the 30,000-foot view. So great conversation with Jonathan. Really appreciate him willing to come on to the podcast, and you're going to enjoy this episode. Welcome to the podcast, Jonathan.
Yeah, hi. It's great to be here. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, Jonathan, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Absolutely. We started the farm in 2009, fresh out of university, my wife and I, and we were originally on rented land at an incubator farm, just getting going, renting all the equipment, and slowly building it up. And we eventually, in our third year, moved to another rented property with 150 acres, mostly wooded, but a pretty big place with a big warehouse and a house and a barn. And that's when we decided to make the shift towards horsepower. So we bought 2 big Belgian draft horses, and we launched into farming with a mix of tractor power and horsepower because we had done an internship previously together to learn how to do that. And we were doing 6.5 acres of vegetables, doing about 180 CSA shares per week, and the other half of the vegetables through farmers markets and also through a cooperative farmers market that we founded with 4 other farms.
Yeah, talk to me a bit about the horse farming. You said you mixed with tractor farming. So what kind of tasks did the horses do and what kind of tasks did the tractors do?
Yeah, basically, we had a pretty big tractor, an 80 horsepower tractor that we were using for chisel plowing, for moving pallets around. Everything on our farm moved on pallets or big bins, the big pallet bins, and for using the bush hog and loading compost and mixing compost. So basically, everything apart from that was done with the horses. So secondary tillage and, most importantly, mechanical cultivation. So we had gotten it down to pretty little hand weeding using a single row riding cultivator with the 2 horses.
Gotcha. So everything was grown on a single row then?
Yeah, everything except for, we had a block that was like bed system, multi-row for the greens and radishes and the herbs. And everything else was single row, except that I ended up shifting towards double row for carrots and beets and building a bracket so that I could have a single tooth go down in between the middle of the 2 rows. So it was basically, we were doing ridge till a bit like Eric and Ann Nordell, and we were growing 2 ridges of carrots and beets on a ridge and doing this really like nerve-wracking cultivation of trying to be very precise because we had 2 rows instead of 1 on the ridge.
Yes, I can imagine, especially with the horses.
Right, exactly. And sometimes people ask like, oh, can you be profitable with horses? And I would say it has nothing to do with it. It's like, we were making a great living and, about $40,000 gross per acre with a single row system, So I think it has a lot more to do with how you're seeing the farm as a business and how you're managing the business end of it rather than is it a tractor or is it a horse?
Absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely correct. All right. So you're farming. What was the next thing in your story?
Yeah, basically, everything was going great, apparently, and we were on track to buy a farm. That was my idea. We were going to buy that 100-acre farm and have the mix of animals and vegetables and all in rotation, this beautiful image I had created when I was 22 when we started the farm. And, online pre-approved to get pre-approved. There's a government agency here that supports farmers with financing, and we were in line to get a $800,000 loan to buy a big, huge farm. And it was like, all right, let's do it. And my wife came to me one day and said, hey, Jonathan, let's sell everything and go for an adventure and take a step back from this whole track that we're on. And for sure, it was a big shock for me. Like, oh, hold on, we've arrived, you know, it's this whole like, no, but we're doing it. Like, what are you talking about? But I let that simmer, and I came around and said, you know what? Yeah, let's do it. We're young, and this is the time to do stuff like this. So we sold all our equipment, the horses, let the lease go, and turned our Sprinter truck into a camper and set out across the country on a this is actually our third year off of the farm. And now we're back in Canada after going around the US and Canada twice and looking to settle back down and launch the second iteration of the farm.
Very cool. All right. So 3 years on the road in a Sprinter. That must have been interesting, awesome. A lot of stories you probably have from that.
Yeah, with a 3-year-old son.
Yeah. So
yeah.
What were your big takeaways from the trip?
It's a good question. Some of my big takeaways was, really just being so inspired by the hospitality and generosity of farmers throughout the country. Just going to a new area and going on Google Maps, looking for organic farm and being like, hey, can we come by and spend a couple of days and meet you? And just being amazed by that generosity. And also that it's possible to farm. I don't want to say it's possible to farm anywhere, but just like noticing the diversity of factors that come together, you know, market, climate, but this can be really done in like so many different ways. And it's like possible to carve out a niche in so many different circumstances.
Mm-hmm. So what were some of the favorite farms that you visited?
One that really stood out for me was Dripping Springs Farm. Mark and Mike up in northwestern Arkansas. It was a 4-acre flower farm and vegetable farm in the Ozarks. Really beautiful place. What really stood out to me there was how important yoga is for Mark and the way that he really carved out time in his day for that. So often we think like, oh, we're going to work and we're going to finish at 5 o'clock. You know, like that was sort of my approach. Like we're going to work, we're going to have reasonable work hours. We're going to finish at 5 and we'll do what we want after that, you know? And at Dripping Springs, what they would do, they would start work around 7 or 8 in the morning, work until 1 o'clock, and have an hour and a half yoga break in the middle of the day. And then, you know, have lunch and start working again until 7 o'clock. And so that really stood out to me as someone who was so clear about what brought him, joy and nourishment in his day and was actually willing to schedule that time in the day rather than leaving it to later.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, when you say organic farm, you really don't necessarily think Arkansas, Ozarks. Is that something unusual for that area?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, going there, I was just following the GPS on my phone and we turn off the beaten track, off the paved road, and we get on this like bumpy, windy gravel road, you know, going deeper and deeper into the brush off the beaten path. And as we're going, there's more and more burnt out cars and like trailers and Confederate flags and Trump signs. And I'm like, if I didn't know that I was going to a flower farm run by a gay couple for the last 30 years, I would be so freaked out right now. So it was just like amazing to see how diverse the country really is. And just talking with some of their neighbors, these people with, you know, Confederate flags and stuff like that, and being like, hey, like what's that like? And they're like, oh yeah, you know, that's Mark and Mike, those good hardworking boys back there. Like, it's like easy to hate from afar, but when those are your neighbors, I was very touched by like, you know, we think of it like, oh yeah, there's so much polarization, but when it comes down to human, there is that link there. And I was just really touched by that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I remember when we started farming in upstate New York, there was a lot of animosity from us to us because, again, the whole organic thing. But pretty soon, those farmers started coming around. And I remember one day the farmer was cutting our hayfield. He stopped his tractor and he motioned me over because I was walking by. And he's like, what are you applying to your hayfield? Because this is the best hayfield that I cut now. And it gets better and better every single year. And I was like, well, we apply compost and we run the animals on it. But that was something that was kind of the turning point of the whole community, just now starting to realize this is a legitimate business. And you're right. There's all types. And it's so beautiful to see how everyone can connect through food.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a farmer, there's always endless tasks to be done. When you were farming, what systems did you set up to ensure your focus and to tackle your most vital priorities every day?
Yeah, basically, you know, the system that I found most vital was just very simple, big blackboard and a bowl of, you know, piece of chalk, and really using that as a tool to get the team on board. A tool so that, you know, I would do a weekly field walk and write down what I thought needed to be done in each field. But then we would have our weekly meeting where we would all sit down, and I was actually one of our employees who would actually write the stuff on the board. And we'd go through and we'd see like what needs to be done and really get like the feedback from the team, because sometimes, honestly, there were parts of the fields that I hadn't even been to that week. And I'm getting feedback from like, oh, wait, you know that those cabbages are ready to be harvested this week? I'm like, wow, Emily, thank you, So that's huge. And the notion of prioritizing, one thing that really made a big difference for me was when I read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. That was really like a turning point for me. It just woke up. I mean, it's too much to talk about in one interview, but it just woke up a whole lot of stuff for me. And really the distinction between urgent and important. That there's like that quadrant where it's like on the top, there's the axis of urgency, and then down the side, there's the axis of importance. And so one quadrant is like urgent and important, obviously stuff we got to do. There's urgent, not important. There's not urgent, not important. That's like, wasting time on Facebook, which we just got to get rid of completely. And then there's the quadrant of important, but not urgent. And that's the type of thing where we need to be shifting our time towards that. So when I sort of got that in my head, it helped me shift from, okay, we got to go, always be in the urgent and important, like harvest, go, go, go mode, versus, hey, we got to go flame the weed those carrots, because it's not urgent. Like nothing's going to happen if we don't flame the carrots this week, but down the road, it's going to pay off. So just going through the board, through the big chalkboard, and prioritizing stuff, not only based on what's urgent, but making sure to get some of those not urgent but important tasks done every week. Yeah.
And then, so that was the day. And at the end of the day, how did you wrap the day up with the team?
Yeah, I mean, that was the week. So we'd have that meeting once a week, about 45 minutes to an hour. And then every morning we just meet quickly to set up some priorities for the day. And I found really useful to write out little lists for each person so that people wouldn't have to always come back and find me after they were done. They knew pretty much what they needed to do for the day. And obviously we'd check back in at lunch just to make sure that priorities hadn't shifted. But I found it really important at the end of the day to close with a short 10, 15-minute meeting while people were filling out their timesheets to really celebrate and acknowledge what we had accomplished in that day. So having people go up to the blackboard, checking stuff off, like not just me as the boss in the evening checking stuff off the list, but really having the team up there, having the satisfaction, checking it off, celebrating it as a team, and also acknowledging what people had been up to. Because sometimes it's, you know how it is on a farm. It's like, what has Bob been up to all day? I have no idea. But coming together as a team and seeing that we're all playing together on this farm is really, for me anyway, it was a powerful moment. And so we tried to work that in at the end of each day. It's so easy to think of meeting time as like wasted time. I meet farmers, we didn't touch on this yet, but I have a coaching business now. So I'm bringing the life coaching model into farming. But one of the things that I see is so many people, there's this idea that having a meeting is like not productive time, And I mean, I can understand you're not going to have a meeting with your crew of 30 people for an hour every morning. Like that would be pretty expensive. But carving out that time to make sure that, we know what we're going to do, but also that we're cultivating a sense of we. And that time, I find is some of the most profitable time that can be spent on a farm, personally, from my experience. Anyway.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And to me, it's all about that 30,000-foot view, stepping back, looking at the big picture, and then purveying that big picture to the team so they can implement it on the farm is so key.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel like your daily habits? You've talked about some, the daily meeting. Do you have other daily habits that you strongly believe contribute to your success?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, one of the most important parts of my day is the morning. So I have a morning routine I do. I make sure to wake up before my family so that I have, maybe an hour in the house quiet where I'm the only one up. It's not really important what it is maybe it is. But for me anyway, personally, my morning routine is I do like maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes of yoga, nothing too serious, just getting my body moving. I have a bit of a meditation practice. And then just setting some intentions for the day and going from there and just really taking that time to connect in with like what is most meaningful for me. Because coming back to that urgent versus important thing, it's like so often it's just go, 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 get the veggies in, get them out, or family stuff or whatever. And it's like important for me anyway to connect with like what is that life's intention that's behind this? Like what is this farm a tool for me to accomplish? It's not just farming for farming's sake, but it's like the farm is a tool that we use to either, make a contribution, achieve something, or create a certain lifestyle that we want to live. So taking the time every morning just to connect in with that vision once again, like you said, the 30,000 foot view is so powerful.
Yeah.
And just also learning the tools to calm my mind. And as you can tell, I'm a sort of enthusiastic, fast talking person, and just taking the time in the morning to cool down and just like, wow, yeah, take a pause. And it doesn't have to be very long, but I know that the days where I skip my morning routine, I am not on my game as much as the other days.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So talk to us about shutting down your farm. Was that really hard? I mean, were there other hard things that you've done in your farming career that you look back and say, this was really hard thing to do?
Yeah, it's sort of like a heartbreak of like, no, but I thought that this is where we were going. And what I realized was I had never allowed myself the flexibility to let my vision evolve. I'd done some workshops with holistic management. We had a holistic goal. We had like this very clearly enunciated vision of what we wanted to create. And I realized that I had just become so attached to that vision, as opposed to creating that vision and then sort of like, letting it go and live in the present and like allowing it to evolve over time.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I realized, one of the takeaways of leaving the farm is that it's really not lost. It's like the experience and the knowledge and the skills and habits as an entrepreneur that I developed in that business. I'm now able to apply in my life coaching business. I'm now able to apply as I go forth and start like iteration number 2 of the farm. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that it was really not a loss, it sort of took a weight off of like, oh yeah, I don't have to be tied into this for the rest of my life. This is a choice I'm making today. And like this opportunity to take off and to go on a road trip and to see what else is out there is present. Let's take it. I wanted to mention also one of the things that one of the motivators for leaving the farm was realizing how isolated we were. We were in this super cool, dynamic area. Like J.M. Forte was my neighbor. Like he lived like 10 minutes away, and we would hang out with them from time to time. And like, there's just like tons of organic farms and bakeries and breweries and like all this cool stuff. And the people I had the closest link to was like my neighbors across the road who were a pair of, conventional sheep farmers in their 60s who were drinking Pepsi. And just by the fact of being close, like, oh, can I borrow that machinery? Can you help me fix it? Those were the people we connected with. And so we realized that it wasn't enough to be in a cool, dynamic area for us anyway, that we really wanted to be somewhere where we could connect with other people, really at walking distance. I would love to be somewhere where I can farm, but where my kid can run outside and play in the mud with the neighbors. That's really what I'm looking for. And it was a vision that we had, in our early 20s, but we had repressed like, oh no, well, that's not possible. It's not feasible. That's just like a hippie dream. We're not going to do that. But to realize that 10 years later, that dream was still there and it wasn't something I could turn away from. And that, yeah, you can keep pushing on a door that's not opening, but eventually it's like, yeah, okay, wait, what's going on here? Like, yeah, this isn't working fundamentally for us as people, because we often talk about ecological sustainability and now we're talking more about economic sustainability, but it's like there's also the human sustainability element that we can have the best designed systems and crop rotations and marketing systems, but if at the end of the day we're tired and broke and depressed and getting divorced, well, what's the point? It's like that's not any more sustainable than growing Roundup Ready corn, as far as I'm concerned. And so the human sustainability element of it is really something that's front and center for me right now in my life.
Yeah, I think it absolutely relates to when they look at stress on the human body and how that's actually worse than so many of these other factors for causing disease. So yeah, it's absolutely 100% a huge problem that I see in the farmers we work with. They feel like they have to keep going because they think like the other farmers out there, oh, if I stop farming, what will these other farmers think of me? And I have to hand it to some of the other farmers, which actually stopped farming the year before we did. And we stopped farming because my wife's family was in Ohio. We just had a baby. She wanted to be near them. And actually, we're now starting to ramp back up our farm production. So it's kind of like a pause like you had. And so that's one of the reasons I really wanted to interview you, because you went through that same thing. Mm-hmm. But this family realized that they couldn't get pregnant because they were so stressed out. And so stopping that farm, going back to the previous life, yes, it was different. It wasn't farming, but it allowed them to have their children and to really be more as a family instead of that stressed out, I want to kick you out of the house because the farm isn't going right. So it's a huge problem I see. And I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really one of the things that has gotten me so excited about life coaching, because when we were on our road trip, one of the things I found was this coaching school in California. And I just went to like the first like personal development workshop, and I was like, wow, I want to learn to do what those coaches are doing, and I want to bring that to the farming community, because what I see is that, like you always say, we're standing on the shoulders of titans. You know, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Like, it's not 1970 anymore. We know how to grow crops organically. And it's like, we all know we need to be flame weeding the carrots, but why are there some farms that are nailing it consistently and others who aren't? What I'm seeing is that it has a lot to do with what's going on up here, you know, up in our brain. And and it has a lot to do with the organizational systems and all this great stuff that's emerging in the community. But it also has a lot to do with the mindset and what conversations we're listening to internally that has us acting in certain ways. So this really ties into the quality of life element. Like we were talking about, living farms that are really sustainable on the human level as well.
Yeah. So who would you say were your mentors in the farming space? You were obviously in Quebec, so I'm assuming some of them came from that area.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, the person who really comes to mind is a guy named Jamie Quinn. He has this farm south of Montreal. He's been farming, I think, since, he's been farming for 40 years, basically. And it was the first farm I ever worked at. And he just took me aside at one point and he said, Jonathan, I think you have what it takes to do this. And he says, I don't say this to everyone, but I see that you have what it takes to be a professional farmer. And that really just like struck me. And like, I still feel, emotional when I think of that moment. And that's someone who I've stayed in touch with over the years. And there's sort of three funny little phrases that I'm not sure if he even remembers saying, but that every so often keep popping into my mind as a bit like these mantras that I took away from that experience. And so the first one is no effing around. It's like, really get out there and do what you need to do, right? The next one is best foot forward, right? It comes back to like that prioritization. And the third one is don't be greedy. And I remember that was a time where we were planting onions and we were planting a little too far into the headland. And he said, no, don't be greedy. So I don't know exactly how those relate, but like those are three sort of little mantras that I took away from him over the years.
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
That third one, especially, don't be greedy. I see so many farmers absolutely do that. They plant too hard in the hedgerow. And I was at a farm recently where we were water wheeling in lettuce transplants. And because they were so tight to the hedgerow, they ran the transplanter into the hedgerow and knocked all the lettuce transplants off the transplanter. So I spent another 15, 20 minutes just cleaning up those transplants, and they weren't as high quality, blah, 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 blah. They damaged the transplanter, all that good stuff. So I think also convert that to playing the long game.
Exactly.
Which I think is so important as well.
And it ties into what we were talking about earlier about taking the time to have team meetings, right? It's like, either we can be looking at the clock and seeing how much this is costing us, or we can be seeing like, hey, this is how we build a team.
Absolutely. Yes. Because the pro employees that you have on your farm is the fastest way to going to the complete next level on your farm.
Absolutely.
All right. So you're starting a new farm. You're thinking about it. Iteration 2.0. What things are you intentionally doing to set it up easy and light for you?
Oh, I wasn't expecting that question. It's really a pleasure starting a farm with experience. One thing that I'm doing different this time around is actually doing some market research, actually looking at, what's out there, what are people doing, and where is there an opportunity, really? And so what I'm looking at right now is probably getting into cut flower production and focusing in on, maybe 5 to 10 different species of cut flowers for the sale to, florists and wholesalers in the Ottawa area. So just taking the time to actually sit back rather than thinking like, okay, what's the sort of standard model? It's really looking at like, well, what's that next wave? It's like I'm looking around and seeing, it's great. There are so many new organic farms out there, and I'm not necessarily seeing that demand is increasing as fast as supply. And so I'm like, well, what's the next wave? I'm just looking at that and trying to figure that out. Another thing I'm doing is really sitting down and actually writing out some standard operating procedures this time ahead of time so that I can hit the ground running with them.
Gotcha. So that when you're selling this product and you're setting your farm up, first, you know exactly where the market is and where you're selling the product. And second, you have a quick way to train and onboard your team members to make sure that everyone's as efficient as possible from the start.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the key things that I'm planning on doing differently this time. And, I'm not sure I could have done this the first time around because I now have, about a decade's worth of experience, but I'm definitely going to be looking to build a team much faster and looking at how do we build a team of people who actually have management responsibilities. It's like the difference between delegating a task versus delegating a role or a responsibility in the farm. And so one of the things, for instance, is I'm definitely going to be hiring an administrative assistant like much sooner than I did the last time around. And that's actually something I wish I could have gone back and told my beginner farmer self, would be hire someone to do QuickBooks and to answer those simple emails and to do payroll and all those things that it's like I can do, but it's like, A, I'm not super great at doing it, and B, I don't really enjoy it. So definitely hiring someone to do some of the administration work earlier this time.
So setting up roles on your farm as well so that everyone owns their areas of responsibility and everyone's in their zone of genius.
Right, exactly.
So where do you like to find employees?
Well, the first time around on the farm, I had mostly people. We have an agricultural school here in Quebec that has a great program. So I was getting several of my employees were graduates from that program, looking to gain a couple of years of experience. There's a really interesting project in Ottawa, which is the Ottawa Greenbelt, which is 15,000 acres of federally owned protected farmland in a belt around Ottawa, sort of contain urban sprawl. So I'm currently negotiating look for a piece of land to lease in the Greenbelt. And so I'm hoping that by being close to a city of about 1 million people, I'll be able to tap into certain demographics that we don't often think about in terms of employees. And one key area, I would just love to have a team of, that like collaborate with a refugee integration organization to bring people on who actually come from farming backgrounds in other countries and who have, immigrated or who have come as refugees to Canada. And like, wouldn't it be cool to have a team where your manager was like a farmer from Senegal, and then like your greenhouse manager was a farmer from Nicaragua, and that's a sort of an area that I would like to look into further. Is how do we get people on that really, appreciate that work and who would just love to work as a manager on a farm rather than being an Uber driver,
That is such a cool idea. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how you develop that out.
Me too. I'm a little shy about talking about that on a podcast because at this point it's totally just an idea. And so we'll see how we actually implement that going forward.
Very cool. Hey, Michael here. I hope you are enjoying this episode so far. If you are looking to shave hours off your week and become a thriving farmer, you're going to want to head over to growingfarmers.com/free resources. There we have a resource bundle, which contains a bunch of different ebooks that we put together over the years on everything from winter growing to wash and shed efficiency to pastured poultry processes to building your farm and buying the right property. One of the resources I want to highlight is our Profitable Farmers Toolkit. Now, this is something that's been downloaded by over 3,000 farmers. It's a free resource. It contains tips for setting up your farm, financial systems and apps that you can use to track your farm, our favorite tools for the greenhouse, field, and wash and shed, innovative apps for farming, and how to put automated systems in place to make your farm run more efficiently. So if you haven't already, pop on over to growingfarmers.com/free resources and download it today. So let's talk a little bit more about your marketing. So you said you really want to focus on the wholesale side. Are you over farmers markets, or you just think that the best way to streamline the products that you want to sell and the demand is to that wholesale market?
Well, this is really in a case where I'm talking specifically about cut flowers. I think in a scenario where I would be looking at going back into vegetables, I would definitely not wholesale. I would stick to farmers market. One experience in terms of marketing that was really satisfying was setting up a collective marketing stand here in Montreal. The website is bioloco.com. I think that's the website, or .ca. Anyway, I can give you the exact website. But we have a large farmers cooperative here where we got together about 125 organic farmers from throughout the province to work together either through collective marketing, collective purchasing, political representation, training, that kind of stuff. And one of the sub-projects that I took on was to start a collective marketing branch in Montreal at the farmers market. It's called Jean Talon Market. It's a large market. So we had to stand there 4 days a week. We had a cold room that we built on site. We had hired a market manager, and we basically split the crops up between 5 farms and worked together to supply that stand. So that's definitely something that I would be interested in looking in further in terms of marketing, specifically as we go forward in an environment where there's more and more small scale farms, and the demand, at least here, I'm not seeing it growing as fast as it was maybe 10 years ago. And so looking at ways of coming together and marketing cooperatively is really interesting.
Very cool. All right, let's talk about advice to new farmers here. What do you think is the biggest mistake that you see beginning farmers making?
I would say it's really taking on too much, and both in terms of taking on too many projects and in terms of taking on too much land. I have that, from my own personal experience. We had big dreams for what we were going to do, and pigs and this and that, and we did pigs for a couple of years, but we ended up stopping that and just really dialing it in, really figuring it out. Like, what do I want to master to start with? And this sort of comes back to what we were talking about before. Don't be greedy, but it's like a connected idea is like less is more. We were at 5 acres of vegetables. We were selling about $220,000 worth of vegetables, and we bumped it up to 6.5 acres, selling 250. And we didn't really make much more net income, and we just had a whole lot more headache. So I wish that I had stayed at 5 acres rather than going up to 6 acres. And that's something that I see a lot with my clients. It's like, I really think sometimes doing less is doing more, like focusing in and growing as the key indicator parameters indicate it. Numbers are numbers, but like in my mind, I have some ballpark numbers that I play with. It's like, if you're a bio-extensive model, like wide spacing, for me anyway, I would not want to grow my farm if I wasn't making at least 40,000 gross per acre. That would be like, baseline. And for a bio-intensive model, like a JM sort of model, if I wasn't making 100 grand per acre, I wouldn't want to grow much bigger than that, And so,
Exactly.
so those are really doing it better rather than doing more.
Absolutely. So are there any specific crops you would say that new farmers should avoid their first year?
I'm a strong believer in shifting the crop mix more and more towards high income crops. Personally, like we grew enough sweet corn to give our CSA sweet corn twice, and we didn't grow any for market. And we did it with the knowledge that was, it was a business decision that we were making to give our CSA members, half a dozen ear of corn twice in the season.
I might just say to add into that corn, because you're right, especially if you're an extensive farmer too, and you have the equipment for doing sweet corn and potatoes and Brussels sprouts and those type of crops like, cauliflower, then maybe they are a good fit. But if you're not, if you're trying to do an intensive those first couple of years on a small scale, those are the crops that are going to be your least amount of return.
Right. And really just taking the time to, it's not like you're not allowed to grow any low return crops. It's just one year I made this chart where it's like I had dollars per acre for each crop, dollars per bed foot or whatever unit you want to use, versus total gross income of that crop. And my guiding line was I ranked both of those and they needed to be proportional. It's like I can grow some sweet corn, but it's got to be like number 32, right? You see what I mean?
Absolutely. Now we actually went one step further. So we actually now have a spreadsheet and we're actually turning it into a web app that is dollars per square foot per week per crop.
That is so cool.
Yeah, because you look at like greenhouse tomatoes versus looking at lettuce versus looking at spinach, and you're never quite sure actually what's making you more money. And so, and obviously the whole nether step would be to add in all the expenses for those crops. That's actually getting real complicated, which we haven't done yet. We're still thinking that version through. But I think the dollars per square foot really allows people to rank those crops and see instantly how their land is returning their investment, especially when you start going to 4-season farming and greenhouses and all of that.
Yeah, that is so exciting. I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, right now the spreadsheet version, we have it for our SFU members, but when the web app comes out, I think we might actually offer that as a standalone product. So we'll have to see though.
Amazing. Speaking of money, if I could go back to my beginner farmer self and tell him something, I would say pay more attention to your budget. And that the budget is not just a tool that you make in January and then look at the following December. The budget is really something, for me anyway, when I made the shift of like, I look at my budget once a year versus I look at it every month or every 2 weeks versus where I'm at in reality, really seeing that the budget is a tool to make real-time financial decisions. So I had set up a spreadsheet with color coding, conditional formatting, so that I could see like, as I go through the season, how am I doing? Ooh, I see farmers market sales are a little slow, and I find myself anyway, and several other farmers I observe, like we have a better grasp of our income than of our expenses. But it was when I started dialing in on the expenses to say like, hey, I need some screws. How much money is left in my hardware budget? Like, do I have enough money to go buy that 5,000 screw box that's going to be like cheaper per screw? Or like, should I just go with the 500 screw box because I don't want to bust my budget this year? It's so easy to get into thinking like, oh yeah, I'm going to get the big format. It's going to be cheaper. Like in the Lean Farm book, they talk about like there's a cost to inventory and there's a time for buying bulk. Yeah. And there's also a time for looking at my budget and being like, ooh, that expense account is a little tight right now. So I better not spend any more in that department. To bring that degree of intentionality to how you're managing your money, right? It's like in all these things, we can be on autopilot or we can be, dialing in the intentionality of how are we using our time? How are we using our money?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you could pick just one, what would be your favorite farming tool?
Can I pick two?
Yes, you can pick two. I will give you that leeway today.
Perfect. So my all-time favorite farm tool is Google Spreadsheets. I mean, I just love Google Spreadsheets because there's so much things you can do with it in terms of planning, in terms of record keeping. I just really love it. And I love the fact that you can have it up in the cloud and access it from multiple devices, and it's not just stuck on a computer. It's one of the things I'm really excited about this fall is really taking my spreadsheet skills to another level with Dan Brisebois and his Farmer Spreadsheet Academy. I am so excited to join that program. And so it's like,
very cool.
Because I mean, I've been geeking out with Dan for years about spreadsheets, and to finally see him come together and like put it into like a program and like have his undivided attention to geek out even further. I'm so excited for that. Yeah. My other favorite tool is the rake.
Okay. Talk to us about the kind of rake.
Well, first of all, I love the timely weeding rake from Two Bad Cats. I've had a chance to use it a couple of times. And, what I would just note with that is that only works, like you have to be at the white thread or cotyledon stage. And this is something that I am so glad that I knew in my farming days as a beginning farmer was, like Elliot Coleman says, cultivate, don't weed. Yeah, so that's one kind of rake. Because that rake actually came out just as I was leaving the farm. And so the kind of rake I was actually using was just a rigid rake, like not a leaf rake, but really like a gravel moving rake. And this is a trick I learned in a book called How the Farm Pays, which is a book from the 1800s where it was a vegetable farmer and a dairy farmer who wanted to write a book together and finally sat down and hired a secretary to transcribe their conversation. And so this was a vegetable farmer in Long Island who was using this trick was with a rigid rake, raking the rows of direct-seeded crops perpendicular to the row as a way of killing the weeds in the row. And it can be sort of freaky when you start, but it's like the degree of control that you can exercise with a rigid rake on a single row is amazing. And so I was actually able to go in and, break the crust and get out those white threads just as the carrots were coming up. So
now, were you raking up to the row or were you raking right through the row?
I was going through after a cultivation pass. So the soil between the rows had already been disturbed.
Okay.
And I was raking on the row, exclusively on the row in a perpendicular direction.
Okay. All right. So you weren't like trying to do like hilling action. It was still just going straight across the whole bed.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to pull the weeds out of the row.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's kind of hard without seeing it, but I got you now. You're going right through. You're just getting the in-row weeds with that rake.
Exactly. And so, I mean, I know you can do that with different tools, but I just thought it was so neat to pick up this trick from the 1800s and to bring it forward and see how great it worked.
We both say there's nothing new out there. It's all just reusing the old tricks and techniques that have, been hundreds of years past. So if you did want to go back, we did a episode with Dan, and Dan, I think, was season 2, episode 2. So if you want to go back and listen to that, Dan does talk a little bit more about his spreadsheets and the Spreadsheet Academy, which I'm also super excited for as well, because there is literally so much you can do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dan and the whole gang at Turnesol Farm is, another group of mentors I will just send a shout out to. That was the second farm I ever worked at. That's where I fell in love with record keeping and where I really grasped what could be accomplished with proper planning. I mean, that's just one of the biggest takeaways that I got from that farm.
Absolutely. All right. So you've mentioned it a few times. Talk to us a little bit more about your farm coaching services. So you learned about it in California. You started bringing it to the farming space. How does that really work?
Yeah, I learned about it in California, and then, I got so enthused that I just registered for the coach training program. And so it's not a coach training program for farmers. It's life coaching. It's for people, right? And you know what? Farmers are people too, I've discovered. And so for me anyway, the way that I've experienced it is that there's times where it's like I am so in my own stuff that I can't even see I'm in it. And coaching is a relationship with a coach, with a person who has the tools and techniques. It's like that fish out of water moment. It's like the fish doesn't know he's in the water, but you pick him up and it's like, holy smokes, I'm in the water. And to be able to actually see, like, what are those fears and limiting beliefs and like familiar internal dialogues I've been listening to that are holding me back from making the contribution I want to make. Because like I was saying, I see so many farmers and my friends, like so passionate and like so mission driven. And it just breaks my heart to see people not reaching their full potential, not making that contribution that they're here to make.
Yeah. So it's the limiting beliefs. This is the way farming is. So recently I was working with a couple one-on-one. We do about 6 of those a year because, again, my time is very valuable and I don't have a lot of time. So we only do like 4 to 6 like one-on-one consultations, the in-depth ones. And they said, the limiting belief that we had when we were farming for the last 10 years is that you could not do this full time. You could not make money on it. He said, that's how we were raised. We were raised, and when we started our farming career, is that, your farm broke even and you had a town job. Or, you were financed by a foundation or something like that. And I think far too many farmers believe that, or that you can't make good money farming. You can only make okay money farming. And I think you and I both know that there's multiple farms out there that make a really good living off of this. Frequently, they don't speak up because I think on one aspect, another limiting belief that they have is they're embarrassed that they actually make good money.
Yeah, exactly. And what I realize is we all have these things, like we are all pretty similar, basically. The human experience is pretty similar. And it's amazing how easy it is to look out and see other farms and be like, oh, wow, they have gotten it so figured out. And like all of a sudden you look behind the scenes and you realize the journey as a human being is such a universal journey that we all have these challenges. And that like ultimately, as we go through life and we're building a business, building a family, it's like these are all really opportunities to grow as people. And the power of actually declaring something out loud, that we can have an intention, we can have a thought, but to actually, one of the powers of the coaching relationship, and I personally have a coach and I love it, is to have someone there that I can say, hey, this is really meaningful for me. And this is a goal I'm willing to set with regards to that. And to have that structure where I know that if in 2 weeks I check back in with them and I haven't done it, they're going to be there to support me, to see like what's coming up that has me holding back from really playing full out,
Yeah. Because I think we all know that life is way too short to not play full out, especially as I have family. I have a family now and I have the kids that are Charlotte's 4.5 and Simon's turned 2 months ago. Every single day they're growing up. And to, be spending 16, 18 hours a day working and not spending the time I could with them as they're growing up. That's super important to me to make sure that the business I build, the life I lead, does have that intentional time to spend with the family and to be able to be at their dance recitals. And, when I'm sure Simon's going to play soccer when he grows up, he already kicks the ball like a champ. So, but, that's the kind of stuff that I want to make sure. And that's what we want for our listeners too. That's one of the reasons we do this podcast, is so that you guys can get the tips, like the stuff you've talked about today, Jonathan, the intentionality of building your farm business so that you can have the time for your family.
Right. And how to keep that front and center, even in the busy part of the summer. Like, not saying we all got to take 10 hours a week to be our, soccer coach, but we have these deeply meaningful things we want to do. And how do we not forget about them in July?
Exactly. And include the family too. So I know some farmers, which, just like I'm always working and the family never sees them. I know other farmers, a couple I work with, that they are really good at making sure the farm is the part of the family too. And the family is doing things together. So Jonathan, where can people find more about you and your work?
Yeah, well, they can check out my website, organicfarmercoach.com. And I'm actually putting together a group coaching session starting in December. So it'll be the second iteration. There'll be 6 farmers coming together as a peer group to really delve in deep, coming together to really support each other 100% with the focus of a coach to score our goals together. So that's organicfarmercoach.com.
Very cool. Well, Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Really appreciate the work that you're doing and looking forward to catching up in a couple of years as your Farm 2.0 takes off. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for putting together this podcast. I really enjoy listening. And I also really enjoy the work that you're up to and the contribution you're up to and the precision that you bring it to it. And, I've been listening to a lot of online marketing stuff and just seeing you go and seeing the things, how you are implementing and nailing this stuff. It's like, wow, if he is any bit as good of a farmer as he is on the whole online space, it must be awesome. So I just really appreciate that. And so keep it up. I have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife today was actually complaining about the number of peppers that we have in our backyard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
All right. Jonathan, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the